I welcome you to my channel. So today we'll be taking up an autobiographical piece written by William O. Douglas, and the title of the piece is Deep Water. A very simple story about how, as a young boy, William O. Douglas nearly drowned in a swimming pool. In this piece, he talks about his fear of water and thereafter how he finally overcame it. So let us begin. It had happened when I was 10 or 11 years old. I had decided to learn to swim. There was a pool at the YMCA in Yakima that offered exactly the opportunity. The Yakima River was treacherous. Mother continually warned against it and kept fresh in my mind the details of each drowning in the river. But the YMCA pool was safe. It was only 2 or 3 feet deep at the shallow end, and while it was 9 feet deep at the other, the drop was gradual. Now, the story begins with William O. Douglas narrating about the misadventures that he had as a child, because of which he developed a fear of water. So he says that when he was 10 or 11 years old, he had decided to learn to swim. And for that reason, he had chosen the YMCA swimming pool, which was in Yakima. Yakima is the name of the place. Now, there was a river also, the Yakima River, which flowed nearby. But because that river was treacherous or deceptive, and many people would die in that river, that is why he felt that the YMCA swimming pool would be the safest option. And his mother also, in order to dissuade him from going to the river, would continually keep him informed about the different people who died in that river. So he feels that the YMCA swimming pool is the safest place for him to learn how to swim. Now, I got a pair of water wings and went to the pool. I hated to walk naked into it and show my skinny legs, but I subdued my pride and did it. Now, he had to take off his clothes, and he did not feel like doing that because that would show his skinny legs. But anyhow, since he was there to learn to swim, he had to subdue his pride, and he had to do it. From the beginning, however, I had an aversion to the water when I was in it. This started when I was 3 or 4 years old, and father took me to the beach in California. He and I stood together in the surf. I hung on to him, yet the waves knocked me down and swept over me. I was buried in water. My breath was gone. I was frightened. Father laughed. There was terror in my heart at the overpowering force of the waves. Now, this part talks about the first misadventure that William O. Douglas had as a child, because of which he developed this fear of water. The first misadventure was when he was 3 or 4 years old, and he had gone along with his father to a beach in California. As they were standing by the shore, the waves knocked over them and swept him or buried him in water. His breath was gone and he was frightened. But this incident was a very small and insignificant incident for the father. But for little William O. Douglas, who was just 3 or 4 years old at that time, he was frightened out of his wits. He felt the power of the waves. And because of that, he developed a fear of water. And this terror was there in his heart from that time. This was the first misadventure. And then the second misadventure was when he decided to learn to swim in the YMCA swimming pool when he was 10 or 11 years old. My introduction to the YMCA swimming pool revived unpleasant memories and stirred childish fears. Now, what are these unpleasant memories? unpleasant memories and childish fears are those of the experience that he had in the beach in California along with his father, where he was completely buried in water and his breath was gone. So, whenever he would go to the YMCA swimming pool, it would revive those unpleasant memories. But in a little while, he managed to gather confidence and he started practicing 2 or 3 times on different days and was beginning to feel confident in water. I went to the pool when no one was there. The place was quiet. So he talks about the misadventure that took place. So one day what happened is he went to the swimming pool when no one was there. Since he was early and he was frightened to enter into the swimming pool alone, he decided to wait at the edge of the pool. But just then, what happened is an 18-year-old boy who was a beautiful physical specimen with rippling muscle came to the pool and jokingly he threw him into the pool. He was a beautiful physical specimen with legs and arms that showed rippling muscles. He yelled, "Hi skinny, how do you like to be ducked?" With that, he picked me up and tossed me into the deep end. I landed in sitting position. Now, when he was thrown into the water by that boy, jokingly, he landed in a sitting position and swallowed water and directly went to the bottom of the pool. Although he was frightened, but still his senses were intact. He was in his senses, his mind was functioning properly. So he knew, although he was frightened, he was not frightened out of his wits. On the way down, while he was going down to the bottom of the pool, he started planning as to what he will do when he reaches the bottom. And then he planned, I would make a big jump, come to the surface, lie flat on it, and paddle to the edge of the pool. So this is what he is supposed to do. As soon as he reaches the bottom of the pool, he is supposed to jump up. Okay, and then he is supposed to lie flat on it and paddle to the edge of the pool. It's a very simple thing. So his mind is working. He knows the strategy as to what he is supposed to do when he reaches the bottom. But that is theoretical. Theory and practical are two different things. Theoretically, he is correct, but practically it is going to be difficult. It seemed a long way down. Those 9 feet were like 90. Those 9 feet were more like 90. And before I touched the bottom, my lungs were ready to burst. But when my feet hit bottom, I summoned all my strength and made what I thought was a great spring upwards. I imagined I would bob to the surface like a cork. Now, this was what he had imagined when he makes the jump. As soon as his feet touches the bottom, he makes a jump and he imagined that he would bob to the surface like a cork. Now, what is bob to the surface like a cork? If you put a cap, a bottle cap, let's say, you put it inside the water and release it. What happens? The bottle cap springs up to the surface of the water. This is what he had expected. But in reality, what happens? Instead, I came up slowly. But he did not come up to the surface of the water like a cork or the cap. He came up slowly. And as he opened his eyes, he saw nothing but water. Water which was dirty yellow in color. Water which was dirty yellow in color. I grew panicky. I reached up as if to grab a rope and my hands clutched only at water. I was suffocating. I tried to yell, but no sound came out. Then my eyes and nose came out of the water, but not my mouth. So he comes up very slowly. He can see only the dirty yellow color of the water. And then he grew frightened. He tried to grab anything that he would find, but his hands clutched only water. He started suffocating and he tried to yell, but no sound came out. his eyes and nose came out of the water, but not his mouth. So this is the first time he comes out of the water. I flailed at the surface of the water. So when he reaches the surface of the water, he tries his level best to stay out there. He makes desperate and frantic efforts. He makes desperate and frantic efforts to stay out there by moving his arms and legs. But he swallowed and choked. I tried to bring my legs up, but they hung as dead weights, paralyzed and rigid. His legs and hands are not under his command. They seemed paralyzed and rigid. It was as if a great force was pulling him under. He screamed, but only the water heard him. And then he started the long journey back to the pool once again. Now, first time he had gone down, came up. Only his eyes and nose were out of the water, but not his mouth. And then again he goes down the second time. I stuck at the water as I went down, expending my strength as one in a nightmare fights an irresistible force. I had lost all my breath, my lungs ached, my head throbbed, I was getting dizzy. But I remembered the strategy. Now also, he is in his senses, his mind is functioning properly. He remembers the strategy. What is the strategy? I would spring from the bottom of the pool. He will make a big jump from the bottom of the pool and come like a cork to the surface. I would lie flat on the water, strike out with my arms and thrash with my legs. Then I would get to the edge of the pool and be safe. Now this is the strategy that he makes. It's very easy for him to plan. He would spring from the bottom of the water, or bottom of the pool. He will bob to the surface like a cork, and then he will lie flat on the water, and with the help of his arms and legs, he will reach the edge of the pool and be safe. But he went down, down, endlessly. He opened his eyes, could see nothing but only water, water that was dirty, water that was dark, yellowish water. And then he was gripped with fear. And then sheer, stark terror seized me. Terror that knows no understanding. Terror that knows no control. Terror that no one can understand who has not experienced it. I was shrieking, crying underwater. I was paralyzed underwater, stiff, rigid with fear. And then, as he goes down, this fear grips him, and then he is unable to express it. He says that nobody or people who have never experienced any kind of fear will be able to understand the fear that he experienced on that particular day. Terror that no one can understand, terror that knows no control, terror that no one can understand who has not experienced it. He was crying underwater. He was paralyzed. Even the screams in his throat were frozen. Only there were two things that were telling that he was alive. That was the pounding in his head and the only his heart, beating in his heart, and the pounding of his head said that he was alive. Otherwise, there was no other signals that showed that he was alive. And then in the midst of the terror came a touch of reason. And then he is still in his senses. His mind is working properly. He knows what he is supposed to do. He must jump when he hits the bottom. At last, he felt the tiles. His toes reached as if to grab them. I jumped with everything I had. And then he makes that jump, huge jump, by which he would spring to the surface like a bob or cork. But that jump that he makes did not make any difference. The water was still around him. He was started looking for ropes, ladders, water wings, anything that he could find. But he got nothing, only water. Water which was yellow in color. And then that terror which had taken hold of him took an even deeper hold, like a charge of electricity. I shook and trembled with fright. My arms wouldn't move, My legs wouldn't move. I tried to call for help, to call for mother. Nothing happened. So frantically, he starts looking for something to help him come out of the water. But there was nothing. He was shaking with fright. He was terrified, horrified. His arms wouldn't move. His legs wouldn't move. They became rigid. He tried to call for mother. Nothing happened. And then strangely, there was light. I was coming out of the awful yellow water. At least my eyes were. My nose was almost out too. And then somehow he was coming out of the water. But this time, only his eyes came out of the water, not his nose, not his mouth. And then he started going down the third time. And as he started going the third time, all effort ceased. All his effort ceased. I relaxed. Even my legs felt limp, and a blackness swept over my brain. It wiped out fear. It wiped out terror. There was no more panic. It was quiet and peaceful. Nothing to be afraid of. This is nice. To be drowsy, to go to sleep. No need to jump. Too tired to jump. It's nice to be carried gently, to float along in space. Tender arms around me. Tender arms like mothers. Now I must go to sleep. His brain stops functioning. He loses his consciousness. He is confused. His thoughts are muddled because of the lack of the supply of oxygen to the brain. There is a sense of delusion in his mind. He feels peaceful. That means he is no longer in a position to think rationally. And it wipes out fear. There is no more fear. It wiped out any terror. There was no more panic, fright. He felt quiet and peaceful. That means he was losing consciousness due to the lack of oxygen to the brain, and he felt nice. His thoughts became muddled and confusing. And then he feels drowsy. He feels it is good to go to sleep. No need to jump, he feels. Too tired to jump. It's nice to be carried gently, to float along in space. Tender arms around me. So, with that, he loses his consciousness. I crossed to oblivion, and the curtain of life fell. He was about to die. Luckily for him, at that moment, he loses his consciousness, and then he is in a state of complete forgetfulness. He does not know as to what is happening around him or to him, and slowly he relaxes. And when he wakes up, he finds that he is lying on the stomach vomiting beside the pool. And the boy who had thrown him into the pool was telling others that I was only joking. Someone said the kid almost died, but will be all right now. Let's carry him to the locker room. Now, several hours later, when he regained his senses and he was feeling slightly better, he went back to his home. I shook and cried when I lay on my bed. And when he was there alone in his bed, he started crying. It is because of the fear that he had experienced in the pool for days. And this fear haunted him for days, and this fear stayed in his heart. And whenever he put on little effort, it would upset him. It would make him weak in the knees, shaky in the knees, and sick in the stomach. And then, because of that misadventure, he never went back to the pool. He feared water, and he avoided water whenever he could. So, with this, we come to the end of the first part, where he talks about the two misadventures. The first misadventure, when he was 3 or 4 years old, he had gone to a beach in California along with his father. And the second misadventure was when he was 10 or 11 years old, and an 18-year-old boy had thrown him into the pool, where he had a drowning experience. Now we come to the second part. A few years later, when I came to know the water of the cascades, I wanted to get into them. So after a few years passed, so he would go to different places near water bodies, lakes and rivers, and wherever he would go and whenever he would get into the water, that same fear, that terror that had seized him, that had gripped him in the pool, swimming pool, would come back, and it would take possession of him completely. His leg would become rigid, paralyzed, and horror would grab his heart. This handicap stayed with me, this fear. He calls it a handicap. Because of that, he was unable to enjoy his life properly. This handicap stayed with me as the years rolled by. In canoes on Main Lake fishing for landlocked salmon, bass fishing in New Hampshire, trout fishing on the Deschutes, and Metalois in Oregon, fishing for salmon on the Columbia at Bumping Lake in the Cascade. So wherever, sometime he would go to New Hampshire, he would go to Columbia, he would go to Cascades, wherever he would go, that fear would follow him, and it ruined his fishing trips. It deprived him of the joy of canoeing, boating, and swimming. So this is what the handicap had done. He could not enjoy life. He could not enjoy canoeing. He could not enjoy boating. He could not enjoy swimming. Whenever he would enter into a water body, that same fear would grip him and would frighten him, terrorize him, horrify him. Somehow he needed to come out or overcome this fear. He tried various ways, but that fear held to him tightly. And finally, one October, he decided to get an instructor and learn to swim. So, he decides that he will get the help of an instructor, swimming instructor, who will help him to learn to swim. So, under the guidance of the instructor, he started practicing 5 days a week, an hour each day. The instructor, what he would do is put a belt around him, tie a rope to the belt, attach the rope to a pulley overhead, and then hold the rope in his hand and ask him to swim back and forth the pool, hour after hour, day after day, week after week. So every time he would swim the pool, that fear would return back. And whenever the instructor also relaxed his hold on the rope, that fear would return when he would go underwater. So it took him around 3 months' time to somehow become a little confident and overcome a little of the fear that gripped him. Then the instructor taught him how to inhale and exhale. Each time the instructor, it was 3 months before the tension began to slack. Then he taught me to put my face. I'm here. Then he taught me to put my face underwater and exhale, and to raise my nose and inhale. So after that, the instructor tried started giving him various lessons of inhaling, exhaling, and he repeated that exercise hundreds of times, and slowly, bit by bit, he shed part of the fear that seized him. Next, the instructor asked him to start kicking his legs, only his legs. So part by part, and then maybe after some time, he started only the exercise with his hands. And part by part, piece by piece, he built a swimmer. And when he had perfected each piece, he put them together into an integrated whole. So slowly, what he started doing is, he asked him to keep on kicking his legs. So for weeks he continued only kicking his legs. At first his legs would not obey his command, and after some time he found that his legs started working properly and was under his command. Thus, slowly, piece by piece, the instructor helped him to become a swimmer. And when he had perfected each piece, hand movement was correct, when the leg movement was correct, one day the instructor told him that now you can swim, dive off and swim the length of the pool, crawl, stroke. So there are various strokes, we know. There are backstroke, butterfly, okay, crawl stroke. So he was asked to swim crawl stroke, and he did. So the instructor was finished. So the instructor's job was done. The instructor was hired to teach him how to swim, and he had taught him. But William O'Douglas was not satisfied. He still believed that the fear still remained inside him, and to check whether that fear or the terror still remained inside him or not, what he did is he started swimming alone in the pool at first. And when he reached the middle of the pool, tiny amount of fear would return. But now he could he could challenge that fear and say, trying to scare me, Trying to scare me, Well, here to you, look, and off I would go another length of the pool. So whenever that fear would return, he would challenge that fear, and he would swim one more time. In this way, he continued until July. But still, he was not satisfied with the progress. He wanted to be sure that all his terror had left. So in order to be sure, he went to Lake Wentworth in New Hampshire. So what he does is, he goes to Lake Wentworth in New Hampshire, dived off a dock at Triggs Island, and swam 2 miles across the lake to Stampact Island. So after that, he takes off his clothes, dives off in the island, and swims 2 miles. He tries the various techniques that were taught to him by the instructor. He tried the crawl stroke, breaststroke, side stroke, and backstroke. All the various things he tries, and only once he finds that the terror returned. And when he was in the middle of the lake, and then, because he is determined to overcome the fear, he challenges that fear and tells him, well, Mr. Terror, what do you think you can do to me? It fled, and I swam on. So that fear disappeared whenever he challenged that fear. Yet I had residual doubts. Now still, he is not completely satisfied, he says. He had residual doubts. Residual doubts means he feels that the fear still resided inside him. And that is why, in order to check it out, what he does is, he hurried west, went up the Teton to Conrad Meadows, up the Conrad Creek Trail to Mead Glacier, and camped in the high meadows by the side of Warm Lake. So he goes to the next destination. He goes to the Conrad Creek Trail to Mead Glacier, and he puts up a camp out there. The next morning he gets up, takes off his clothes, and jumps into the lake and swim across to the other shore and back. And then he swims across the lake and then back to the place from where he had started, just as Doc Coupron used to do. Now, Doc Coupron most probably was an eminent swimmer, a noted swimmer. So just like Doc Coupron, he also goes across the lake and comes back. I shouted with joy, and Gilbert Peak returned the echo. I had conquered my fear of water. So just like Doc Coupron, he also tries that, and he is successful. And this is when he knows that he is able to overcome his fear of water. And that makes him shout with joy. And the peak returns the echo. He had conquered his fear. The experience had a deep meaning for me, as only those who have known stark terror and conquered it can appreciate. Now he says that this experience of overcoming the fear of water had a deeper experience for him. And only those people who have had some kind of fear and have overcome it will be able to understand. Now, what is this deeper experience that he talks about? What is the deeper meaning that he got? What is this deeper meaning that he talks about? The deeper meaning, he says, in death there is peace. This is the deeper meaning he gets. In death there is peace. There is terror only in the fear of death. As Roosevelt knew when he said all we have to fear is fear itself. So, the deeper understanding, the deeper meaning that he gets out of this experience is that in death there is peace. Now, I'll just digress a little bit and quote a poet, John Donne, a metaphysical poet, in one of his poems, Death Be Not Proud. He compares death to sleep and tells that, I'll just quote the last two lines. He says, one short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. So, in that poem, he compares death to sleep. Now, if death is compared to sleep, then death has to be peaceful, because from sleep we get peace. If from sleep we get peace, then death is permanent sleep. We get more peace from death. So he says, the deeper meaning that he gets it, in death there is peace. Death is not frightening at all. What is frightening is the fear of death. There is terror only in the fear of death. And Roosevelt, the former US president, had also made a remark once when he said that all we have to fear is fear itself, which means that fear is not external, it is internal. And with willpower, with grit, with determination, we will be able to overcome that fear. So this is the deeper meaning that he gets out of the experience. Because I had experienced both the sensation of dying, this is the sensation of dying when he had almost drowned in the swimming pool, and the terror that fear of it can produce, and the terror that he lived with after that experience. He had experienced both those things. And that is why that will to live somehow grew in intensity, and that is why he can live joyfully now. At last, I felt release. So after overcoming that fear, after overcoming the handicap, at last he feels relieved, free to walk the trails, path, and climb the peaks. Now he is not frightened of anything. He is free to walk anywhere he wants, climb different peaks, and to brush aside fear. Now he can walk alongside with fear. Now he can walk alongside with fear because he is no longer afraid of fear. He has overcome it. He has defeated fear, so he can walk along with fear, aside fear. So this is the story of William O. Douglas overcoming his fear of water. Now, in brief, if we were to understand this chapter, we can say that this chapter can be divided into three parts. The first part talks about the two misadventures. The first part talks about two misadventures that he had. One at the beach in California along with his father, and the other in the YMCA swimming pool when he was 10 or 11 years old. That is the first part. The second part is when he takes the help of an instructor to remove the fear. And the third part is when he tries to check out whether any of the fear still remained inside him or not, or the residual doubts that he had with regard to the fear. So with this, we conclude this chapter. So I hope that you have understood it. Thank you very much. We'll meet again in the next video.